Good evening. Welcome to APTN National News. I'm Dennis Ward. We begin in Ukraine, where the key city of Kherson has been captured by Russian forces. The city of 250,000 people is an important port on the Black Sea and the Dnieper River. Images from the last few days from Kherson have begun to trickle in on social media, including the presence of many tanks and soldiers. Last night, the mayor said troops had forced their way in and had imposed a curfew on residents. Today, the regional governor says on Twitter that Russian forces have occupied the administration building. It's been 1 week now since Russian troops began the invasion of Ukraine, and since then, more than 1 million people have fled the war-torn country.
We're scared.
I bet you're scared. Now you're safe.
This is the scene at shelters and border crossings as Ukrainian families flee to safety. UN officials say the speed and scale of the exodus is an international crisis. Residents desperate to escape falling shells and bombs are crowding train stations looking for safe passage, not always knowing where they're heading, but feeling at least a momentary sense of relief.
I haven't slept enough, and it was a tough time crossing the border and the whole trip. But right now, I'm really relieved and excited a little bit because I know that I'll be safe here.
The agency says as many as 4 million people could leave Ukraine, and even that could be a conservative estimate. Second round of talks between Russia and Ukraine have ended with no breakthrough. Delegations met face-to-face again in Belarus. Both sides discussed humanitarian corridors and agreed to more talks. But Ukrainian officials say they didn't get what they were hoping for when it comes toward a possible ceasefire. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky, who has become a hero to his people and around the world, is challenging Russian President Vladimir Putin to sit down for negotiations.
It's not about I want to talk with Putin. I think I have to talk with Putin. The world has to talk with Putin because there are no other ways to stop this war. That's why I have to.
We'd like to hear what you think about the ongoing invasion of Ukraine. Here's how to continue the conversation. You can send your emails to news@aptn.ca or leave a comment on our website at aptnnews.ca. You can also find us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok. And follow APTN News to join the conversation and see our latest stories. In other news, in Saskatchewan, 2 Prince Albert police officers will stay on the job after being called out for how they responded to a domestic assault that resulted in the death of an infant. APTN's Leanne Sanders reports.
13-month-old Tanner Brass was killed 3 weeks ago in the northern Saskatchewan city of Prince Albert. According to police, a 911 call came in the morning of February 10th in regard to a dispute. Kyla Frenchman of Thunderchild First Nation was taken to the police station. Just hours later, officers reported to the same address for the death of her child. Cage Brass was arrested for second-degree murder. Now, the Federation of Sovereign Indigenous Nations is calling for the officers who responded and the chief to be fired for ignoring Kyla's concern about her child.
When Kyla put the call in, it was clear she said, "My baby." They get to the residence and detain her. Again, she said, "My baby." In the cop car, she said, "My baby," and in the cells, she said, "My baby."
Grand Chief Brian Hardlott says everyone needs to ensure this never happens to another First Nations family again.
I am troubled, very, very, very troubled on how this situation was handled. when all the support systems are there. All the government support systems that are there. All the First Nations support systems that we have. That they did not follow policy, their policy.
The First Nations leaders claimed during a news conference yesterday that the mother was ignored because she was Indigenous. She was too distraught to address the media. Prince Albert Police Chief John Bergen responded to the allegations late yesterday, saying,
as we work through and understand the details of the shortcomings of the Prince Albert Police Service, not just this one call for service, we're going to be in a better position to build back that trust that we're committed to work towards.
Bergen says the officers who responded had 5 years' experience between them. They're still on the job while the Public Complaints Commission investigates. He says the service now has a dedicated inspector to oversee its patrol division and ensure policy is followed as a direct result of the case. Leanne Sanders, APTN National News, Saskatoon.
Well, there have been several incidents between a First Nations person and a taxi driver in Winnipeg. Last month, a woman from northern Manitoba called for a cab in Winnipeg, and once the ride got underway, she says the driver demanded cash up front. Our Daryl Stranger has more on her story.
Loretta Caribou is from Matthias Colomb Cree Nation in northern Manitoba and was visiting family in Winnipeg. On February 15th, Caribou says she requested a ride from a home to her hotel. She said once the trip got underway and midway through the trip, the driver stopped and asked her for cash before continuing.
I kept asking him why he was asking me. Was it because I'm First Nation? Right away, I thought about racial profiling. And as an Indigenous woman, I felt like I was being a target.
Caribou recorded part of a conversation with the driver asking why she needed to give a cash deposit.
But why are you asking me to give you a deposit before my destination?
We may ask for the money up front.
She eventually gave the driver the money as she did not want to be kicked out of the taxi.
I wasn't familiar with the area, and I didn't want to end up on the street because it was extremely cold that day. So I just gave him the deposit, and then even after I gave him the deposit, I still didn't feel safe. I still had that fear. If I pay him, how do I know he'll take me to my destination or just dump me somewhere else? That was the fear that I was still feeling.
APTN News reached out to the city of Winnipeg, who gave the following statement. Drivers are not permitted to stop a taxi and ask for a deposit/fare mid-trip. Drivers are permitted to ask for prepayment. However, they should only be asking for prepayment in cases where there is a known history of non-payment of fares. APTN News also reached out to Unicity Taxi for comment on the incident.
We're still investigating, and we have called the driver to ask more questions like what exactly happened, right? So further on that, then after we can make some decisions, like we need to take any disciplinary action on that or not, whether he said anything wrong to that person or not.
Caribou's experience prompted MKO, which represents First Nations in Manitoba's north, to issue a warning to First Nation citizens regarding taxis. MKO continues to have concerns about the safety of First Nation citizens using taxis in Winnipeg. We continue to call on all taxi companies and the City of Winnipeg to step up to ensure First Nations people can access safe taxi services. In the fall of 2021, a First Nations woman says she was assaulted by a Unicity driver. Winnipeg police later announced charges against the driver. And a First Nations man was also asked for payment after the trip had started in October of 2021. Caribou says she will file a complaint with the Unicity Taxi. Daryl Stranger, APTN National News, Winnipeg.
Time to step aside for a quick break. Still to come, COVID-19 restrictions are lifting in the north.
This Friday, I know it will be a welcome breath of fresh air for many.
Welcome back. Nunavut has the highest rate of violent crime in Canada, according to Statistics Canada, which is why it is important that when you phone the police, someone answers. Well, one Nunavut political leader says that isn't happening and is calling for a public inquiry into Nunavut RCMP. Here's Kent Driscoll now from Iqaluit.
Canada has an average of 189 police officers for every 100,000 people, according to StatsCan. In Nunavut, that climbs to 278 officers for every 100,000. With that heavy a police presence, you might expect a quick response to service calls. Iqaluit's mayor says that isn't what's happening.
We hear a lot, I called the RCMP and they didn't show up for a fight. I called the RCMP, they didn't show up for a drunk person walking down the street. A number of things. Over the years, we've heard these things for many, many years.
When police don't show up in Nunavut, the stakes are higher. Nunavut has a violent crime rate 7 times the national average and a domestic violence rate 10 times that of the rest of Canada. During Nunavut's COVID restrictions, the government of Nunavut officials told residents to call the RCMP to report violations. According to the mayor, that's about as far as those complaints got.
So they were refusing to attend COVID calls. Our taxi company, our taxi drivers, not the company, but our taxi drivers went on strike specifically because the RCMP weren't attending their calls, waiting 45 minutes for an RCMP member to show up to, vandalism that was happening to their cars.
Almost $69 million a year. That's how much Nunavut's RCMP, known by their detachment letter, V Division, spends to police Nunavut. Bell went public this week to pressure the government of Nunavut to call for a public inquiry into why Nunavut's V Division isn't responding better to calls. We asked V Division to answer some questions for this story. They did not return our call prior to the broadcast.
The thing is that if you're calling the RCMP and they're not attending, there's more of an issue than just safety. I don't understand what's going on. I've had talks with them. The former Minister of Justice wouldn't even respond to my emails. The RCMP said that they would look into it, never reported back. A deputy commissioner, I'll look into it, never reported back. I've been in contact with the new Minister of Justice, and I let him know that this was going to be happening because at this stage in the game, when they're not even responding to the mayor, how can our citizens trust that they're actually going to respond to calls?
Nunavut's Legislative Assembly returns to work in Iqaluit next week. In Nunavut's consensus system, the regular members act as the opposition, questioning the government. We should find out soon if the mayor making noise is going to have any effect on the MLAs, and if those regular members will have any questions about RCMP response time. Kent Driscoll, APTN National News, Iqaluit.
Thanks, Kent. Well, as the COVID-19 Omicron wave continues to flatten in the north, places like the Yukon will soon be ditching its COVID-19 masking requirement. Here's Sarah Connors with a look at how public health measures are set to be eased across the territories.
We have moved past the peak of the Omicron wave.
On Wednesday, the Yukon government announced it will lift all remaining COVID restrictions in the territory.
After a long and difficult 2 years, 2022 is looking promising.
As of March 18th, a mask will no longer be required in public indoor spaces. The requirement to show proof of vaccination will also be dropped. On April 4th, the territory plans to remove its vaccination requirement for government employees. Other restrictions like limits on gatherings in bars and restaurants will be lifted on Friday.
And as more public health measures are eased this Friday, I know it will be a welcome breath of fresh air for many.
In the Northwest Territories, it's much the same. Its public health emergency is set to end on April 1st. Nunavut is extending its public health emergency until March 17th, though restrictions have been eased in communities like Arctic Bay, Iqaluit, and Cambridge Bay to allow for bigger gatherings. It's part of the territory's new plan to manage COVID-19 by lifting certain restrictions every few weeks. Sarah Connors, APTN National News, Whitehorse.
Time to step aside for another break. Still to come, a birch bark canoe becomes a piece of history. Stick around.
Mihtiituskaya kepidohtiot. Kepikanoa pahito, pikanoa pungkuyaho.
Welcome back. Time now for our photo of the day. And this photo comes to us from APTN National News' very own Holly Moore. She sent in this picture of a view she enjoyed while on a walk along the grotto located at St. Malo, Manitoba. Thanks for sharing. If you have a great picture, email it to share@aptn.ca. We'd love to see your cookum scarves, adorable pets, beautiful scenery, and any family and cultural events. Be sure to include all the details. Now let's take a look at Friday's weather forecast. Starting on the East Coast, -5 in Halifax, 4 below with snow in St. John's. -18 in Nain, 16 below for Happy Valley Goose Bay. -5 in Montreal, snow and 10 below in Chibougamau. -6 in Sault Ste. Marie, snow and -4 for North Bay. -6 in Thunder Bay, 7 below in Sioux Lookout. -12 in God's Lake and Norway House. -7 with snow in Winnipeg, 12 below and snow in Dauphin. -10 in Saskatoon and North Battleford with snow. -9 in Meadow Lake, 11 below for Buffalo Narrows. In northern Alberta, -6 with snow in Fort McMurray, 3 below and snow in Grand Prairie. -3 with snow in Lethbridge, -8 in Edmonton. +9 with showers in Vancouver, 12 in rain in Victoria. +2 with snow in Prince George, 0 in Dease Lake. -13 in Old Crow, snow, and -1 in Whitehorse. -11 with flurries in Yellowknife, -10 in Norman Wells. Snow and -16 for Sax Harbor, -6 and sunny for Inuvik. -14 in Chesterfield and Whale Cove. -19 in Resolute, -24 in Arctic Bay. A Cree elder in Alberta learned the skill of building canoes from his father, and one of their canoes is now part of history in the province. Now, as Tamara Pimentel reports, that elder is looking to pass the teaching on.
Well, my father was a man that wants to do things he completed. You have to complete what you want, what you're working on, no matter how hard it is.
Elzier Orr was in his 20s when he helped his father, Arnold Orr, make birch bark canoes from scratch in Chippewan Lake.
In those days, I was younger, and I didn't even think of coming back to that history.
The pair were commissioned by the Royal Alberta Museum in Edmonton. Now the canoe is in museum storage and not accessible to the public. But this film by Jean Gregoret remains in the Alberta archives. And it's something Elzier had recently rediscovered on YouTube. He met with APTN at the community center in Wabasca, Alberta for an interview. And when asked to reminisce of these times with his father, Elzier told his stories in Cree. Every aspect of this canoe is built with materials from the land. Here, tree roots are used to hold pieces together. Elzier says it takes over a month to finish a project like this, weather permitting, and he and his father made 6 more canoes later on.
kahit niya migot mat siya ma mungskitin gani kumaga.
After seeing the film nearly 60 years later, Alzir hopes to see the Canoe, but for now he begins to plan to pass the knowledge down. He sketched step-by-step instructions in hopes of finding someone who'd be interested in learning the art of canoe making. Tamara Pimentel, APTN National News, Wabasca.
Great stuff. Love seeing that old viz. Nation to Nation is up next with a look at the latest goings-on in Parliament. Here's host Brett Forster with a preview from Ottawa.
Thanks, Dennis. The convoy protests and blockades have wound down, but political debate over the federal government's use of emergency legislation to stop them hasn't. The Emergencies Act forces Ottawa to call a mandatory inquiry and set up a separate parliamentary committee. I'll talk to NDP MP Leah Gazan and newly appointed Senator Michelle Audette about what needs to be probed. Later, I'll be joined by astrophysicist and interim Green Party leader Amita Kuttner. We'll discuss a new report the UN Secretary General calls an atlas of human suffering. Stay tuned for that right after the news.
Thanks, Brett. Looks good as always. Well, today in Montreal, a landmark agreement was signed between APTN and CBC Radio Canada. The Memorandum of Understanding will allow for more collaboration between the networks. APTN CEO Monica Ely and CBC CEO Catherine Tate put pen to paper today. The goal of the agreement is to enhance both networks' abilities to create Indigenous programming as well as its promotion. There's also a commitment to recruiting, retaining, and advancing Indigenous employees, as well as supporting Indigenous producers. The collaboration will also apply to the news divisions, although both APTN and CBC Radio Canada will retain editorial control of their own content.
But everything that's been happening recently in Canada, with the recovery of the unmarked graves of the children, people are more sensitized, I guess, aware of what's going on. They want to know more. They want to know the real stories. And the real stories of Indigenous people are told by Indigenous peoples.
Thanks to your expertise at APTN, we have so much to learn and gain, and so we look forward very much to working with you.
And that's all the time we have for your APTN National News for this Thursday. For news anytime or more on anything you've seen here, visit our website, aptnnews.ca. I'm Dennis Ward. Thanks for being with us. Stick around. Nation to Nation with Brett Forster is up next. Have a great day.